Righty, welcome everyone to our Saturday show. We have a relatively small group, but maybe more will join. And of course, we always record the show so that people can learn from and enjoy it for years to come. So we always start with our prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Very good. Well, we've got attorney Larry Becraft with us, and Mark Lucas is also with us. We're grateful to both gentlemen for all the great information that they always provide to the audience. And we have a bunch of cases that are going to be discussed tonight. And so, Larry, Mark, do you want to lead off?
Well, I will. One of the things I've been interested in over the years, since the mid-'70s, are the currency transaction reports. And, the freedom movement, the tax movement, is interested in, authority that's related to taxation. Well, currency transaction reports has been an area there's been a lot of litigation regarding it. There's been a lot of decisions regarding the constitutionality of it. And if people will study this area of the law, this topic, they can see, people who have battled the Treasury Department over certain issues and have prevailed. So there's a lesson to be learned from studying this field of law. Now, I got exposed to this, back in 1990. I was Jeff Dickstein, and I were defending two guys that had been charged with a giant conspiracy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a conspiracy to defraud. And, basically what a conspiracy to defraud is typical of many of the cases that were brought over the years against the freedom movement. You have a group that gets together and starts acting, like the typical of what the government calls tax protesters. Well, Dave and Vern had created this organization in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And back in those days, there was kind of a hot organization, National Commodity Barter Association, that was trying to create entities to compete against banks, against Federal Reserve banks, to offer gold and silver to their members. Basically, what an NCBA organization would do, and I represented several of them, these organizations would create a membership group. The membership group would treat the organization as a bank account. They would give their checks that they received from their businesses or from their employment and deposit them in an account with the organization. And the organization would keep the funds of the members in gold and silver coin. And then the organization could be directed by the member to, pay certain bills. So that's exactly the way most of these NCBA organizations operated. They bring in a whole bunch of members. The members would create accounts. They would deposit checks with the organization. The organization would go out and either get cash or gold and silver coin. And they would operate according to their members. They would pay the bills of the members. And then they would hold the spare funds of the membership. So Dave and Vern were charged with, impeding and obstructing the IRS, trying to conceal people's income. You can see how the government would make this claim that somebody that's in business would want to hide from the IRS, so they would funnel all their checks to this organization, and the organization would help hide the assets, the money received by the members. And also the IRS would contend that, for those that had tax liens against them, this was a real good way to conceal your funds, prevent them from being levied upon. So in this case, Dave and Vern were doing precisely this. They had a membership organization. They had a number of members. The members would give their checks to the organization. The organization would have their own separate account, big account with, tens of thousands of dollars in it for their members. But, it would be just one account, and only the organization would know how much a member had in the kitty at a bank. So one of the things that I had to confront in this case was more than 800 currency transaction reports. Now, yeah, I was aware before I got involved with this case, about CTR laws, but I never had anything to do with them. But, here I was required to deal with 800 of them. Now, to me, this is an area, looking at what has happened with this field of law, currency transaction reports, certainly provides a very good example for people in the tax movement to study that field and see what we can do, this kind of, how this other field became successful. Joe, over the last couple of days, I've been studying a new area involving these CTR laws, and there have been some recent victories. There's 4 good cases, decisions, organizations, and people have brought challenges to this expansion of the CTR laws, and the courts have held, certain aspects of this new expansion of the CTR laws unconstitutional. Now, Mark, isn't this exactly what we're trying to do? Do not these cases offer excellent examples to us about how we need to proceed with, going down, pursuing our battles involving the income tax? But can't you see that this new field of litigation, these new cases, should demonstrate a way that we can reproduce similar victories?
Absolutely. That's one of the main reasons we're having this exceptional show today, to prove the point that we've been trying to make in terms of going on offensive rather than playing defensive and nice with the IRS and waiting for the CP59s to show up at the door. Plus, this would be a very good example, once we read these cases, of the kind of language necessary to approach a win, which cannot be arrived by all these recent things like the what is that you sent me the other day, that email from the revocation of election complaints?
Oh, yeah.
From the,
hey, but can we stop right here and discuss?
Of course.
There's within the last 3 and 4 months since the beginning of the year, I have seen this other organization spring up, and it went from having no members, say like late December of 2025, until they got more than 100,000. They got 100,000 members right now, and they brought in a lot of people, and it's just a bunch of people that are concerned about the tax issue, and they're just ordinary everyday Americans that really have no experience in dealing with what is called tax protest. So, Mark, what have you seen in regarding that organization?
Well, I would, if you don't mind, I would like to share actually an email from somebody from that organization. Would that be all right?
Yes.
It's maybe like a 1.5 minute read. Well, it says revocation of election ? This message to me is from someone who is highly knowledgeable. I know many of you share his YouTube content. He's authored a few books, and I trust he knows what he's talking about. Myself and 2,500 could be doubled because you get 2 with the price you pay. Other, I don't know what a symbol is, but big bucks or something like that. Other people paid good money to receive an 8-page ROE, revocation of election, that is riddled with law codes, etc., that we individually sign, had notarized, and sent off to our state and federal. There's more, but I'll leave it at that. The IRS website talks about ROEs, so it seemed legit. But after further research, I personally noticed it referenced, quote, mine workers, Close quote. Not sure what to make of that. Every time I think I have it semi-figured out, I don't. After this message from this person, I'm wondering if anyone in here has received a fine for sending in an ROE, and what type of letter did you get with that fine? I'm not naming the person who sent me this message out of respect, as I don't know if you would like to be named. Any info on this is appreciated. I tried looking it up and researching. Can't find anything on this. Anyone have this happen? And this is the end of the letter. And we had a gentleman that couple, 3 shows ago came in and attested to the validity of the ROEs. So people see all this information that's out there available, and it's very enticing. They're desperate in their own personal cases and circumstances. They don't know which way to go, and they don't know why they go that way, but it sounds convincing. And everybody tries to keep it simple without realizing that it's actually a complex issue, which in the ultimate analysis can only be resolved if we do have court cases like the ones you are going to address tonight.
Well, hey, Mark, I've never dug into this issue. I've seen it it seems like it's been around for about 10 years. And it's based upon, the Internal Revenue Code. The Internal Revenue Code starts at Section 6001. That deals with filing requirements. 6001, 6011, those that are required to file income tax returns, federal income tax returns, and those that are liable for tax. And then Section 6012 deals with the general issue of who's required to file income tax returns. And then Section 6013 deals with, this issue of revocation of election. And for a number of years, people have said, well, gee, you can modify this election to file a return. And there have been a lot of, tax arguments based on that. But I've never really looked into it. I've just seen it for a long time, but I've never really dug into the issue because I just thought it was, it had no merit. Do you know anything about this argument?
Well, basically, what you just described is a pretty good, accurate description of it. People assume that somehow, have you heard of Mercer, hidden contracts?
Yeah.
Okay, so somehow they assume that they must have contracted into some kind of a federal obligation at some point in time through either filing federal forms, which could be true to some degree, and it makes some sense because you sign under penalties of perjury and the feds are going to take your money just because you offered it, right? But they think that this revocation of election procedure that some people sell is a legitimate way of backing out from what they consider may at some point in the past has created an election to be subject to the federal income tax. That's the gist of it.
You elected pursuant to Section 6013 to file income tax returns? Is that the argument?
Hey, it's as foreign to me as it is to you, Larry, because one of the first things that I looked for, I wanted to see if it's justified in law, if there are any revocation of election cases that were brought to light. And all you can find is basically that ROE claimants are seen as frivolous by the tax agencies.
So it's a popular issue, and the system rejects it. And
so there's one thing between what we're looking at on the screen right now. This is the case, right? But if you go to the currency transaction reporting, you read the objectives, the regulatory requirements for CTRs. You're going to find general language such as follows. And I'm going to read this because I don't know if Joe has it It says filing obligations. A bank must electronically file a currency transaction report, CTR, for each transaction in currency, deposit, withdrawal, exchange of currency, or other payment or transfers, or more than $10,000 by, through, or to the bank. These currency transactions need not be reported if they involve, quote, exempt persons, close quote, a group which can include commercial customers meeting specific criteria for exemption. Refer to transaction of exempt persons sections for more information. So somebody reading this, right? Sounds like, okay, all banks must do that. Everybody making the deposit, exchange, withdrawal, whatever, is going to be reported on. Isn't that what everybody would think, Larry?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, good. So does that mean that such a conclusion, you can make a revocation of election and present it to a bank where any similar attempt, I'm being a little humorous here, and boom, problem solved. No, that's not what's going to take. What's going to take is exactly what we're looking at, this memorandum, opinion, and order for this flowers titled companies. And I wanted, Joe, if you don't mind, let's scroll down a little bit to look at the language, how carefully it was planned right there in setting up the case. And this is what I would like for Larry to actually take over, read this, and explain to us in the attorney language why this is absolutely necessary to distinguish between how it's set in a case and how the case deconstructs the presumption generated by the filing obligations I just read. Because let's say people want to learn about this, so they go read filing obligations, and they're going to walk away with that erroneous conclusion unless they know what the history behind the currency transactions reporting and why set up the winning on this case. Do you want to tackle that, Larry, or?
Well, yeah, I'll let you. You've already started. You know what you want to say.
Okay,
But
plaintiff.
to me, the issue is, hey, we have another field of federal law from which we can learn some things, because people that were concerned about this field of law, studied that field of law, found the constitutional flaws in it, and went to court and raised those. We've got the same thing with the income tax.
Yeah, but we're not going to spill the beans right off the top.
Well, that's true, but I do think that people need to, one of the things that they, for decades, I have just seen a lot of these people that are promoting arguments about the income tax. Nobody wants to, there's nothing difficult about knowing about how the income tax was built. And once you see how the income tax was built, there are some, problem areas.
Let's do something new tonight. Let's let Lisa share with us. Let's give her the floor. Let's unmute her, because she knows a lot about FinCEN. Let's see what her take is on this.
Oh, really?
Hello. Thanks for letting me talk. Yeah, I'm the director of sales and marketing for probably one of the largest title insurance agencies in Michigan, and we were thrilled to hear about the this FinCEN law being vacated. We retooled for about a year, and we actually started reporting March 1st because that was the deadline, and then we stopped reporting mid-March. But what was expected of responsible parties for reporting was ridiculous, and it was unconstitutional in my opinion. Not only did we have to report on the buyer, and it was only on cash transactions, but we had to report on the seller. We had to report about what their bank account number was, what how much money they were netting, which is fine, but if the property was in a trust, we had to report about their trust, and it was just really, I couldn't believe that it was going to stay. And like I said, I was very happy. I'm really interested in comparing why Fidelity, which is a national underwriter, why their case lost, but this Flowers title company won. I'd like to be able to compare those two cases, because I think it might give us some great hints about, what was the magic sauce, so to speak.
Well, in the next year, these cases are going to be appealed. That's the impression I'm getting from the vibes you get from Treasury about these issues. So I would say we're probably going to have something a little bit more definitive. We've got U.S. district courts, which are trial courts. They're the ones that have entered these decisions. But it means a whole lot to me and a lot of other lawyers that, you got these 4 cases, and you got 4 district court judges that have said, oh, this is unconstitutional. So, even though they're going up on appeal, it looks like there's a real good shot that the appellate courts are going to agree. That's my view. Have you got?
Yeah, well, it was classifying any cash buyer of real estate as a money launderer, which I think that was the primary argument, I think, in the Flowers case, was, you're putting every cash buyer into a category of being a criminal.
Well, but there are other issues. And one issue is OMB control.
State.
And, OMB control numbers, and states and citizens, those are there in these issues. And, I would like to see other, but this is where the American people have got to be on the lookout for how can we, increase, freedom in this country by attacking some of these laws that are blatantly unconstitutional. And, in reference to the CTR laws, I haven't mentioned anything about it. But the area of application and who it applies to, these CTR laws, that is a real issue. If you go take a look at, 31 USC, and you start off with the CTR laws, 1010, and you take a look at the words citizens, residents, and persons. And, I think that there is a real problem once you understand, who in the world do the CTR laws apply to? And isn't there something here that, we're kind of missing, but it's kind of sitting there right in front of your eyes? And I say that there's a lot of that. And boy, there's some real problems in reference to compliance with the OMB control numbers. I just want to know, you go into the past, when you take a look at these old, back in the 70s and 80s, Treasury was going out and getting OMB control numbers for its regulations in reference to these CTR laws. Now, they're not there. Now, why don't you go and take a look at the display of OMB control numbers for all? The Supreme Court said correctly that the CTR laws apply to nobody until Treasury comes along and implements enforceable regulations. Well, if they're enforceable regulations, that means they're subject to OMB control numbers. And when there are only 3 volumes of Treasury regulations for all of Title 31. And I am just flabbergasted. Why do we have the enforceable regulations? Damn, I'm just amazed. It looks like it's, to me, why does it looks like it's just all international, to the exclusion of domestic and involving citizens. That is right there. That's another area that I see. If you take a look at the certain areas of the CTR laws, that is an issue that jumps right out at you. I am just absolutely amazed, when you take a look at once you understand the CTR laws, and once you understand OMB control numbers and the cases we have regarding that, and then take a look at, which, in light of the OMB control numbers, then you see that, well, gee, there's only a certain select amount of these regulations that are enforceable. And Treasury created this. And that leads me to the conclusion, why in the world, does it look like Treasury is just an international organization? International to the extent it excludes anything domestic, and especially involving citizens. Gee, that's a real issue. Now, I think I probably have said too much and too convoluted for our attendees. Did that make sense, Mark?
It makes sense to me because
We've discussed.
but for the audience, it will make sense, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring them home in their understanding of how all these things are linked, because the truth is hidden. It's hidden beneath things that are not available to average person out there. And once they realize how they're connected, and they understand how jurisdiction really operates in relationship to the federal government and how the nexuses are actually created, then they will feel more relaxed and more willing to jump into the tax honesty movement from a new perspective.
Maybe we need to have a program just focused in on this. But my problem is that I can see this stuff. It's very, very important, but I have this fear of talking about it, because every time I do something like this, then you have a promoter come along, grab it, start promoting it, and, it gets slaughtered. It's just raised in a lackadaisical manner. And, I consider a lot of these people that are promoters to be issue killers.
And definitely, this is not a pro se means of approaching. If you look at the way the case is written and the clarity of the language and phrasing and structure of the complaint or the plaintiff, it's quite a lesson to be learned.
Yeah, but if we want to, I call it clarifying Treasury's jurisdiction.
Correct.
And for decades, I've kept it quiet, but in my personal opinion I've reached the conclusion, dang, Treasury's our international agency. Treasury has an international jurisdiction. This international jurisdiction, there's nothing international between domestic citizens and the federal government. Citizens at home, in reference to Uncle Sam, there ain't a damn thing that's international in that relationship. But that's exactly what the Treasury Department is. It's an international agency. It has and it says as much. And then if you sit down and you really understand the CTR laws, it kind of jumps out at you.
This is where people like the 1040 NR in the cases of taxation, and people that are looking at the specific of the definition for United States, they say, well, international, but international in terms of foreign, therefore you're foreign to United States, to the federal government. And that's another argument that stems from groups like SCDM and others.
Wrong, absolutely wrong.
Yeah, and so maybe we need to have a lesson about that, why we think that is wrong, and demonstrate it so that people are not confused and go all sorts of directions. Because if the law of this country for the government is in the Constitution, and those are the binding chains, that's pretty clear, understanding what the binding chains are. And if we understand those binding chains, it would become obvious what the federal government can and cannot do, especially in areas of taxation, and especially in area of legislating what they might try to sell as applicable to average American.
Well, we've been on for an hour. Do we want to keep on going? And if so, what are we going to talk about?
Well, do you want to give just like they got the 4 cases?
Well, I thought it would be, I don't think, to me, there it's just a demonstration of this. Hey, overall, the big issue is Treasury doesn't have this power. And I think it's real important for people to know what these 4 cases say. And then also appreciate, obviously these cases are going to go up on appeal. I do not see, especially with where Treasury is headed, with where Treasury is headed, these are roadblocks.
Well, I guess what having been a CPA for 15 years and just seeing the way the, you can call it propaganda or continuing education or whatever you want to call it, but how the powers that be are able to get the masses to comply with a law that they don't have to comply with, or that is not applicable to them, or potentially not applicable to them. So there's some series of gears that must be put into motion in terms of the publicity, the professional, the AICPA and the bar and all these places that must convey a message of like, hey, take a look at this new compliance stuff that you got to get your clients complying with. You know what I'm saying? Because how is it? I mean, I imagine like with the banks, it's maybe more simple because they have these banking associations and their conventions, and these groups just tell their members, hey, we've got this compliance stuff coming down the pike. Here's how you're going to comply with it. And then
that's exactly what happens, Joe. Especially in reference to this. There has been so much promotion, professional promotion. CPAs, these organized groups, groups that deal with banks. I've just seen too much promotion.
And you got to believe that they're all in bed. They're all in bed together, right? I mean, I'm not saying anything that's any big revelation, but they're all in bed together. The media, these groups, associations, the banking associations, and the government, and it's almost like somebody knows in the way that they write the laws and the regulations that they're not ubiquitously applicable, but they write the laws to make sure that they're constitutional, and yet the story that's told, the fish story that gets told all the way down to the customer that is told they have to fill out the CTR, is that these are absolutely required. And yet that's not a coincidence that is the message that's conveyed to the customer at the teller window, right?
Yeah, but Joe, in reference to these new laws, this has been going on. This went on with the income tax.
Right.
I've spent a whole bunch of times in National Archives, in the law library, and in actual, taking around in the actual documents. And that's exactly what happened with the income tax. You had I'm sure Treasury Department hired some of these law professors to write books. Oh, this is what the income tax means. And so rather than people sitting down and reading the law, what they would do is they would read what some law professor wrote. And the law professor said, well, this is the way it works. But then also you had, at that time, there was no track record with the income tax. And, we have something that our posterity doesn't, our ancestors. They didn't have what happened later. And what happened with later legislation involving the income tax, now that we've got a whole lot that we can, look at how things went, this field, this history of this law, and looking at that history tells you a whole lot.
Well, it's almost like I'm sure it's the same tentacles that you'd see in the medical establishment. How anyone that was a naturopath or had some kind of healing that worked, they get pushed out, and then the medical schools and the medical associations that were controlled by Rockefellers and all of them, those are the ones that became mainstream. And so I'm sure it's the same dance card with regard to these banking laws and the income tax. And, they just, what amazes me, I guess, is that they still bother to make these laws fit within the boundaries of the Constitution.
Actually, I think what they do, they sidestep the Constitution now with the trick of treaties. So there's something there that we might want to look into. They are under obligation of treaties. They offer a certain benefit, and therefore municipalities now are bound indirectly through the laws of treaties, and that's how they sidestep the Constitution.
Well, no, if you go over to my website, I've got a memo on how treaties form the foundation for new fields of law. Go to federal jurisdiction, that file, and treaties and jurisdiction. Now, this is real important. Hey, our laws regarding the federal wildlife laws are treaty-based. And there's a lot of other federal laws that are treaty, the drug laws, like marijuana, cocaine, those are treaty-based. And if you want to know something about how federal laws are built on treaties, this is I think, an understandable presentation of how treaties are a source for federal municipal power. And boy, there's a lot of federal laws that are treaty-based. And, a real problem is treaty-based federal laws are only international in nature. And there is no international connection between us and Uncle Sam. And that's an area that needs to be built up. We need more case authority.
That's one of the arguments that Thomas Fried makes when he has an exhibit, 71 exhibits that he offers on his site. One of which is regarding Section 61, that stems from Section 22A of the 1913 or 1939 Code. And 22A identifies the Canadian treaty, and he has a whole spiel about that. And maybe we can, for the sake of discussion, we can purchase that. The exhibits thing is about $6 or $10 or whatever. I can buy it, and then we can discuss it in the future presentation if you're willing to do so.
Well, again, I haven't seen what he's got.
Right.
I have a real good idea about what, just when you talk about the topic, being familiar with this aspect of the law, I think
right, but treaty. It's treaty.
I think I have a pretty good idea of what it involves, especially since you mentioned the 39 Code.
Yeah. Well, says that 61, Section 61, today's 1661, is basically a recoding or renaming or renumbering of what used to be 22A, which under Code of federal regulations table of federal index table. It shows under section 519, which is identified as a Canadian treaty.
That's
So
part 519.
519, yeah.
Yeah.
Part 519. Yeah, part 519.
The parts between 500 and 600, that's a very important area. That is international. Wow.
Right. So that will make a good argument, a good discussion. So that links to the discussion we're having on treaties, and that's why I meant it, because it also applies to income taxation, not just CTRs and everything else.
Well, there's a whole, there's just a lot, what you see in the airports. Congress, the federal government's control over air traffic is treaty based. What our federal drug laws are treaty based. If you want to see, I tried to isolate as many areas as possible, but if you want to see which fields of federal law, when you dig into it, are really treaty based, I cover a lot of it right here in this little memo. I hope it's understandable. I think it's understandable. But if you want to see another aspect of the federal government, how it is power, take a look at this memo on treaty-based federal laws.
I did send the link to the chat. We probably have to kind of wrap things up so that I can get to my dinner.
All right.
My dinner being a banquet kind of a thing, not like I gotta go to dinner on the table. Anyway, apologies to everyone. We did have to have it early today, so we have a very small group, but we're grateful for you that came and joined us. There'll be some leftovers basically that we'll archive. Mark will kindly edit and get that out to everyone. But we're grateful for you who watched us cook the meal live. I always go through how to get get at Larry's website. You can go to a search engine, type in Becraft Briefs. You'll find the link. Takes you to the Dixieland Law Journal. We just showed you how you can go to federal jurisdiction as one example, but he's got many links here, including taxation, which we've talked about many times in the past. My website is agentfortruth.com. And my Twitter or x.com account is at Joseph Bannister. I've got, the various invoices, the various interviews, too much accountant in me, various interviews that I did. I sent the links in the chat, but if you go to at Joseph Bannister on X, you can also see almost all, I think, or all the interviews that I've recently done. Even some really oldies but goodies, like the one that was in America, Freedom to Fascism with Maria Bartiromo. Anyway, that is about it. Any last words, Mark?
No, that's it. Thank you. I think we had a good show.
Very good. Larry?
Come back next week.
Sounds great. All right, everyone. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.